Analyzing Miles Morales. Today we start this new section in which we are going to analyze elements of series or movies so that you understand them better and can use this knowledge in your drawing or painting process. Let's begin. In Spider-Man Across the Spiderverse, we see a Miles a little older than in the first movie, but that still has some of that childish air. We can see on his face that he's not yet an adult. Let's see some keys to take into account if you want to draw Miles Morales and how to understand a little the style used in this movie. Let's start by looking at his proportions. Let's take into account that this character is already almost an adult, and his proportions must already be the final proportion, so he is not stylized to make him look small. On the contrary, he is quite long. His proportions are 8 heads and a half. Let's remember that the ideal proportions proposed by Da Vinci are 8 heads for a perfectly proportioned adult body. At the top, from the head to the pelvis, we see a traditional proportion, 4 heads, but the legs are slightly longer, a model taken from manga or anime, to have a much more stylized body. Children, remember, long legs are equal to an elegant body. Those of us who have short legs, we can cry. If you want a more complete analysis of Miles' body, let me know in the comments. Now, let's look at his face. First, let's keep in mind that most of the lines in this character are straight with a soft curvature. The first thing to keep in mind is that his skull was not drawn with a circle as it would be done with a normal person, but it is drawn with an oval. I defined the upper part of his head approximately here, and this circle oval is going to pass to the lower part of the nose. When dividing this oval by the center, I find the height of his eyebrows. The size of each of these parts should be the same as the size of the jaw in a normal person. So we see that the jaw is smaller than it could be. This leaves us with a face ratio of 1 by 1 by 0.6 or 0.7 because his mouth is a little bit open. The lower part of his eye is in the middle between the eyebrow line and the nose line. I divided the total space of the eyes into 5 equal spaces, and we see interesting things. First, the height of the eyes is 3 spaces, and we have a free space up to the eyebrow, which is 1 space high, and 2 in the outer part in line with the highest part of the eye. Using the same measurement, we see that the width of his eyes is 4.5 spaces. The faces in these characters always give us guides that make it possible to draw them, making everything more precise. We just have to know which guides we are looking for. Let's look at the guides in Miles' eyes. The inner line of his eyes points to the tip of his nose, while the small line that goes out to mark the caruncle points to the center of the upper part of his eyes. The external joint is in the center of the space, that is, at 1.5 spaces, and as always we see that the lower part of the eye creates an imaginary line that joins it with the external end of the eyebrow. The corner of the eyes in its inner part, along with the width of the nose, shows us an internal angle of the eyebrow. The eyelid line is very close to the eye, and the corner of the eye uses the same eyebrow guide, at least in this reference. You can see that his iris is somewhat oval and is not too big, like we would expect in a Disney character. The space between light and shadow shows us the point where the face turns to the side, and we see a small space between the corner of the eye and this point. The width of the head is approximately 4 eyes, which gives us the 3 eyes, taking into account that the space between the eye is another eye, and half of an eye on each side. His nose is an inverted T shape, approximately 6 spaces wide. The fleshy part of the nose has a wide octagon shape. We see how the lower part of his nose almost perfectly follows the lower line of the oval that makes up his skull, and that the width corresponds to the upper inner corner of his eyes. The back of his nose starts to protrude in the space in the middle of his eyes, aligned with the outer part of from there, it extends up and down in the form of an hourglass, that if the upper foot reaches the space in the middle of the eyebrows in the lower point of this. Downwards it will extend to this line and then it will go inward. The sides of the nose rise higher than this line. Not for drawing but for shading, we're going to consider this rather square shape that goes to the inside of the eye and to the line where the nose extends up. These lines show the nose structure, which makes it higher with respect to the eyes and the rest of the face. Defining the shape of his mouth is a little more complex because it is going to undergo many changes, but let's look at some generalities. From the small octagon of his nose, we follow lines that could form another octagon for his mouth area. From this point, we see these different planes that extend to his lips. His lips are fleshy, but the upper lip is thinner. In this image, we see how the entire set of the lips forms an octagon, with a longer upper line and a shorter lower line. But we also see that by joining these lines, we find the point where the internal lines of the lips change direction. 3 lines for each surface of the lip. In the external parts of the face, we see several triangular forms that mostly give us information about the different planes in it. Information that will be very useful for shading. The ears are the size of the central space, from eyebrows to nose. We consider perspective, as this line turns to the side of the face. They do not show up too much, and we can draw them with 5 straight lines, or semi-straight lines. His hair is a wonderful afro, which can be easily followed with about 7 straight lines. From a 3/4 view, we're going to see the same shapes as in the front view, but we must consider the perspective. Maybe we're seeing his face straight in this line, so everything from there moves away and becomes narrower. In his eyes, we see that the farthest line is narrower, but also more vertical, which is an effect of perspective. In addition, the right eye almost reaches the edge of his face, so he loses that half of an eye that was left in the edge of the front view. On his nose, we can no longer see the right side, but we can see the line that forms the bridge and covers the right nostril a little. We see how this line that looked straight from the front now forms an angle that goes from his eye to the cheekbone and goes down to the nose. We also see the perspective on his lips in a similar way to that of the eyes, the narrower right part and with lines in a more vertical position. We can see how that characteristic line of the side of the face is also visible when we see it more from the front. When we see the face on its side, the first thing we notice is that the skull is oval, this time horizontally. A line in the center of the oval shows us the top of his eyebrows. If we divide it into 3 spaces from the hairline, we see the reference for the lower part of the eyebrows. For the space of the nose and jaw, we see how the lines extend from the foremost line of the skull, but we see that it is in line with the chin. The circle on the side of his skull shows us a flat area, and the triangle that comes out of his ear gives us a flat area on his face. These 2 forms create the side of the head. His nose is a triangular shape, and we see how the nostrils fade toward the tip. We see the guidelines that form the tip of the nose. His eyes are a triangular shape with curved lines. In its corners, we can follow the lines that extend from it to the eyebrow, nose, and cheekbone. The eye is a concave area of the skull, reason why we see it behind in reference to the other face parts. In the area of the mouth, we see the sides of the octagon, and we see 2 of the 3 lines that form the lips. We can also notice how the upper and lower lips enter into the opening of the mouth. We can notice that the skin around the lips protrudes in the same 3 areas. His ears are made up of 6 semi-straight lines. Notice how these 2 lines are almost completely horizontal or vertical with respect to the plane of the head. The inside of the ear is almost a question mark shape, formed with semi-straight lines. The hairlines use the guides of the head, using almost completely horizontal and vertical lines with a slight angle and then a slight curve to form the side bones. The back of his head forms this beautiful curve with the back of his neck, and in front we see an angle of almost 90 degrees toward the front of his neck. With this, we close the analysis of Miles Morales' face. I hope that with what you have seen here, you will feel encouraged to go and draw him, knowing what guides you can use in the construction of the structure of his face. I hope you find this video very useful. If you did, please like the video, subscribe, leave us a nice comment, but more importantly, share it with someone that can find this content useful. See you in the next video.
Adios.